once, Bud. My ass.
I'm only 4. Bonjour, Monsieur Pussycat.
Cracking toast, Robert.
Start spreading the news.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the short podcast about short films. I am your host, and we are discussing the Academy Award for Best Animated Short. Today's episode is about the 12th year of the award at the 16th Academy Awards, which is celebrating the films of 1943. Today's guest is currently the most featured guest on this podcast, appearing for the third time today. She was previously on the 1932-33 episode talking about the Three Little Pigs and the 1936 episode discussing the Country Cousin. Please welcome back hosts of the 300 Passions podcast, our favorite short, Miss Zita Short. Hello, Zita.
Oh, thank you so much for having me back on. It's such a delight whenever I get to chat with you.
And it's a delight for us to talk to you as well. Remind us, what is your familiarity with this category?
Oh, it's extremely limited. I've only really seen the shorts that were nominated in the years that we discussed in the past. So I'm not coming into this with a whole lot of background knowledge.
Well, at this point, you're probably more educated on this category than most people, even most Oscar fans. Well, let's just get on into the nominees then. There are 6 nominees this year, and our first nominee and the year's winner is the Yankee Doodle Mouse, directed by William Hanna and Joseph Barbera. This is the 6th nomination and second win for Fred Quimby, making him the second person to win multiple awards in this category after Walt Disney, of course. This is also the 3rd nomination and first win for Tom and Jerry, thus beginning their reign of terror in this category. This short has Tom the cat go to war against Jerry the mouse using household items as faux weaponry, as well as just straight up dynamite. Zita, start us off. What did you think of the Yankee Doodle Mouse?
Oh, I loved this one. It has such a rambunctious spirit, and you get so many of those sort of quintessential Tom and Jerry moments involving things like dynamite. And I just love the way that they play with cartoon logic within this short, where absolutely nothing makes sense, and yet they manage to convince you that this world functions on its own internal logic, and I just love that. It's a really great world building exercise, and while it wasn't quite as funny or amusing as I hoped it would be, I was still very impressed by the craft on display.
I have to agree. Like, this is their 3rd nomination, and those first 2 shorts, they were both very kind of standard cat and mouse kind of short films, which is a very common dynamic that you see in a lot of animated shorts at this time. But I think this is the point when Tom and Jerry really starts to go and get into their own kind of style and their own kind of zaniness. It really ups a lot of the cartooniness of it, like the intensity of the violence and just the creativity of what they're doing with this very simple formula they've got. And like this one specifically, I just really enjoy how and so of course this is 1943. This is the middle of World War II, and it's like, and while most animated shorts of this time, and especially the ones on the previous episode of this podcast, most of them would try to really lean into kind of like war propaganda, trying to get you to support the war effort and all that. And while this one, of course, wants you to do that, that's probably an ulterior motive of it. But really, it's just kind of, the only word coming to mind is satirizing, but it's not really satirizing the war, but it's just kind of like putting the facade of this war on. And it's just like Tom and Jerry are essentially like playing war with each other in their little house and using all these different household items. Like, you've got Jerry throwing eggs at Tom, and on the box it says hen grenades. And it's like he has this little cardboard plane too. He's dropping light bulbs from it. And it's just like, it's very creative. Like, it's not just they dropped Tom and Jerry in a war zone. They found ways to replicate the war kind of in using the home items. That is really creative, I think. And it just makes it a lot of fun. And the fact that they aren't actually like in Germany on the front lines, it's just like that actually also helps with the comedy. It ups the sense that this is all kind of make believe, and all that this is all just kind of like maybe in their heads or something as they're chasing each other around, and they're just kind of having fun with it. Because really, even though Tom does want to eat Jerry, at the same time, you kind of feel like he doesn't want the game to end at all. And so that he kind of lets Jerry win sometimes just because, he wants to keep playing around with Jerry. It's really interesting to think about.
Yes, it's more playful than you would expect it to be, especially in comparison to one of the other World War II centric shorts that we'll be discussing. And it is just wonderful, as you point out, that they really embrace that sense of almost the elliptical storytelling that's present within the Tom and Jerry universe, where that dynamic is always in place. It's almost never challenged. And these two will always be at loggerheads.
Mm-hmm. And there's actually kind of so their previous nomination is The Night Before Christmas, and that short, it starts out as kind of a very typical Tom and Jerry short. They're just kind of chasing each other around the house, and there's some Christmas themed antics going on. But then it takes a turn near the end of the short when Jerry gets trapped outside and Tom is like snuggling up against the fire, but then he lets Jerry back in, and they kind of have this truce for the Christmas day or whatever. And it's like, I think that moment, when I recorded that episode, I was thinking like, oh, this is so out of character for Tom and Jerry. But thinking about it now, like as I watch more of these Tom and Jerry shorts, it's kind of, it kind of defines their whole relationship in a way, because like I was saying, it's like they of course one wants to kill the other, but they also kind of need each other. And I think that moment kind of defines the rest of this. And so I never thought I'd think so much about Tom and Jerry. I when I was setting up this podcast, realizing that, there are 13 different Tom and Jerry shorts nominated in this category within the span of 10 years. It's just like, it's just going to be a lot of the same thing. Tom tastes Jerry, comedy ensues. But, there's a lot more to it than just that, I think. I think there is a lot of creativity behind the scenes. And I guess that's thanks to William Hanna and Joseph Barbera, who pretty much directed the whole series.
Yes, yeah. And did they create Scooby-Doo?
They became the Hanna-Barbera Productions, and they made the Flintstones and Scooby-Doo, Wacky Races, and all those things, Jetsons. It's like they're massive figure in animation history.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they got their fame and start with Tom and Jerry. And that's a good place to go on to our next nominee, which is the 500 Hats of Bartholomew Cubbins, directed by George Pal. This is the third nomination for George Pal, and my hatred for him burns stronger. This short is based on the Dr. Seuss story of the same name, with even the adaptation being written by Seuss as well. And it starts with a king's procession going through town, and everyone in town takes off their hats, except for little Bartholomew Cubbins. The king demands he takes off his hat, but Bartholomew seems to have an infinite supply of hats on his head. No matter how many hats he takes off, there's always another one on there. Bartholomew is taken to the king's castle to try and find a way to get his hat off. So Zita, we're recording this before any of these episodes release, so I need to explain to you that I hate George Pal. I hate his shorts, even though he is a very influential figure in stop motion animation. I'm not a fan of his work, and that continues with this short. I did not really enjoy it. I thought it was kind of very stupid and simple. Like yes, it is a Dr. Seuss story. They're supposed to be kind of silly and stuff, but I didn't think there was much of a story here or anything. It's just there's this boy who has a lot of hats on his head, and there are a lot of different hats. One thing I can compliment it on is that they have a lot of nice designs for all the different hats he has. And I think in the original story, it is it's just like all the same hat that he has, but for this they made it a bunch of different hats, so I guess they could have a little more fun with it, because it is kind of boring to me. I don't know what's your thoughts yet. We'll get to that.
And it's a Jared Leto origin story where this is his alter ego now, I guess, Bartholomew Cubbins. So
Huh?
I was really concerned when I read the title and I thought, oh God, this is something that resonated with Jared. So how dark and twisted could this possibly get? And
Well, it
as
gets a
we went
bit
on,
dark and twisted at one point.
sort of, I guess it just feels it's so simplistic in terms of its narrative that I started to get bored
Yeah.
after a while. And I'm sure if you really wanted to, you could sit down and construct a whole thesis around how this is about fighting back against fascism, and it's about the pervasiveness of corruption within a society that's dominated by an autocratic figure. But I don't necessarily think that this shot deserves to be given the benefit of the doubt. I think all of those themes are there if you want to dig into it. I just don't think that it presents them in an especially engaging manner.
Yeah, it really just kind of goes through the motions, really. It's just this boy has a lot of hats, and then it's just like they bring him to the castle. It's just like he just can't take the hats off, and it just kind of runs through that joke again and again. It's just like they have like this archer who tries to shoot his hat off, but oh, there's another hat there, and then it's just like eventually it's like they want to execute him for some reason, I guess because of his insubordination for not taking his hat off. And it's like and this is a pretty elongated part of the short where he's walking up to the executioner. He's just like, you're gonna cut off my head. And then he's just like, he puts his hand under. It really draws this whole thing out. Like, we are going to see Bartholomew Cubbins decapitated within the guillotine. And then it's just like and then the blade starts coming down, and so there's all these quick cuts to all the different characters, and then but suddenly the guy who's reading this big book that says law on it, he says stop, and apparently you can't execute a person while they're wearing a hat, which this is very weirdly dark, and I feel like this is probably the best part of the short also, because that is a kind of good punchline. I think you just like, you can't kill a person while they're wearing a hat. And yeah, the resolution is just that this is a weird resolution though, because the resolution is that because the king buys Bartholomew Cubbins' hat, that means that's the last hat, or maybe it just happened to be the last hat that he decided to buy. I don't know. It's just like, oh, okay, he just buys it and it's over. Like, is money the solution to all our problems? I don't know.
Yeah, it sort of has that interesting dream logic of a lot of other Dr. Seuss stories, but it's not, it seems like one of his lesser works. I think there's a reason why it isn't as well known as some of the cherished and beloved classics in his oeuvre.
Yeah, you don't really see much about. There hasn't been other adaptations of Bartholomew Cubbins. There hasn't been a terrifying live action adaptation with I don't know, Danny DeVito as the king with all this horrifying makeup on him. It's like,
oh God, oh, don't put that into my head. Oh.
But yeah, this is just very mediocre. And even like one of the few saving graces in other George Pal shorts is that I usually like the designs or the environments, but even here it's very minimal. Well, like in some of his other shorts, like Tulips Shall Grow or Rhythms in the Ranks, like there's these like large environments that are flush and full of color, but this one is very kind of small. Like it's very cramped. And it's like a lot of it is just inside the castle or inside the little town. And it's just like you don't get that sense of scale like you do in the other ones. And it's just like, and like, sure, maybe that's kind of the point. Like they do say that Bartholomew feels small or whatever, but it doesn't help me appreciate the design of it, is what I'm saying. Which, any
No, I
final
think
thoughts?
what you're getting at. No,
Oh,
I don't have anything else to contribute on
all
this
right.
one.
All right, we'll move on to our third nominee, which is the Dizzy Acrobat, directed by Alex Lovey. This is the fifth nomination for Walter Lantz and the first nomination for a Woody Woodpecker cartoon. Woody Woodpecker was Walter Lantz's most popular character, and fun fact, one of the few animated shorts to garner a nomination outside of this category was a Woody Woodpecker short. The film Wet Blanket Policy was nominated for Best Original Song in 1948 for the Woody Woodpecker song. But that's all that's really interesting about Woody Woodpecker for now, at least. The Dizzy Acrobat is about Woody Woodpecker wandering around the circus, and he eventually wants to see the show that's in the big tent, but a security guard won't let him in, and comedic hijinks ensue. Zita, what did you think of the Dizzy Acrobat?
It felt a bit insubstantial in comparison to some of the other nominees. And I do not mean that in the sense that, oh, it doesn't have a weighty enough message, because we'll get to it. The film nominated that does try to impart a deep, meaningful message to the audience did not work for me. I just felt as though this was not as stylistically inventive as some of the other shots that were nominated. And there were a couple of comedic beats, though, that did remind me of Buster Keaton shots that I've watched recently. So that was sort of fun, trying to line those up together. But I'll just admit that it didn't hold my interest as much as the others did.
Yeah, it's a very kind of like it's a very typical kind of short, but it's also not very like inventive at all. Like it doesn't try to do any gags that are like all that interesting. It's just, it if you made if you replaced Woody Woodpecker with Bugs Bunny or something, nothing would be different about this short. Or and it's just and reading into the history of Woody Woodpecker, like trying to find things to say about him, he was kind of just a ripoff of the Looney Tunes characters. Like after the success of Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck and all that, they made Woody Woodpecker to try and kind of emulate that. And it's just it shows. It's just a Woody Woodpecker is just kind of a discount kind of Bugs Bunny type, right? And it feels it, and it's like there's some good attempts at comedy here. It's not like the worst thing I ever seen. It's not absolutely devoid of anything humorous, but it's not good. It's not a good short, or as it just kind of feels like a waste of time.
I have to agree. I almost completely forgot about it after first seeing it, even though I knew obviously I was going to discuss it for this podcast. But it does just sort of disappear into thin air after you first see it, and that's never a good sign.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's with all the different slapstick kind of character shorts around this time, this one just blends into the crowd, and that's all there is to really say about it. Unless you have anything else, I think we'll move on. All right. Our fourth nominee is Greetings Bait, directed by Friz Freyling. This is the seventh nomination for Leon Schlesinger and Warner Brothers' Merry Melodies, and this is about a worm trying to bait fish into eating him so that they can be caught. So this short is not funny. Like I said before, that the Dizzy Acrobat was like there were at least attempts at humor that I could like appreciate as kind of humorous. There's nothing here though. In Greetings Bait, there's just a devoid of jokes. It's like the main thing is just that like, oh, this worm has to try and convince fish to eat him so that he can capture them for the guy in the boat up above the water, but it's just like it doesn't do anything funny. Like I couldn't think of anything I really liked about this. It's just a worm talking to fish. What did you think?
I felt really let down because the concept sounds intriguing. Like you think, oh, that's sort of funny. This man with counterintuitive, not a man, sorry, a worm with
Worm.
counterintuitive motivations. And then you watch the short, and as you point out, it almost feels like a mumblecore movie if it were an animated short, where it's just a lot of people sitting around, and it's not like they're aiming for realism or anything. But when considering the fact that so many of these shots are renowned for being fast paced and just constantly delivering the laughs, they're expertly constructed. There's never a point where you're bored. It's 7 minutes of pure joy. And then you watch this and you're waiting around for minutes at a time. It's just a really peculiar example of the shot where maybe it's good because it helps you appreciate how difficult it was to put these things together. But still, surely they would have learned some lessons from looking at the Tom and Jerry shots, looking at the more successful examples of this sort of film.
Yeah, it's like, and it's not like the crew on this were inexperienced at all. Like Fritz Lang is one of the like most famous animation directors of this time period, and it's one of the Merry Melodies shorts. So it's like it's not for lack of trying, like, or not for lack of knowledge. Maybe it was a lack of trying actually. And it's just like, in reading up on this, apparently the worm and also the man in the boat, there's supposed to be a caricature of this guy named Jerry Colonna, who was a guy on Bob Hope's radio show. Oh, and the title comes from a catchphrase he had on the show. And it's just like, maybe if I knew who this guy was, I would think this short was funnier. Just like, haha, I recognize the reference. But I don't think that would eliminate the fact that there are no jokes in this. And also, you calling this mumblecore just is making ideas run through my head of like Bugs Bunny starring in Francis Ha, or Daffy Duck in Tiny Furniture. It's just like, hey, maybe we should try to do like a Looney Tunes mumblecore movie like that actually tries to be it. Maybe we find something there.
Yes.
Maybe. But I get the feeling that there's not much else to say about this.
No.
So we'll move on to our fifth nominee, which is Imagination, directed by Bob Wickersham. This is the first and only nomination for Dave Fleischer. Yes, that Dave Fleischer, longtime film director at Fleischer Studios, with his brother Max producing those shorts. And what is he doing here? Well, after the closure of Fleischer Studios in 1942, as well as the dwindling relationship between Max and Dave, they parted ways. And Dave ended up at Columbia Pictures producing their Screen Gen shorts. And now we're here. So what's Imagination about? It takes us into the imagination of a little girl and shows us a story of a girl doll being kidnapped by this wind-up villain toy, and a boy doll has to save her. Zita, what did you think of Imagination?
This one was cool. It was unexpected. I wasn't expecting something this weird, which is not to say that there isn't experimentation in a lot of the more famous series of shorts, but this did feel more like an independent feature in a way, where I think it wasn't quite as slick or as polished as some of the other nominees. And it really sort of took the edge off after watching some of the other ones where it was starting to get slightly monotonous. And I think I did get a kick out of the fact that this is defiantly weird. I would note that it's not as expertly constructed as some of the more popular entries in the genre, but I still think that this stands out among the crowd.
Yeah, this is like, while it is clearly like a lower budget kind of thing, like Columbia is not one of the bigger animation studios. I do really love this short. I have a fondness for it, and it's really nice to hear you say that you kind of appreciate it too, because most of the time other people seem to hate it. But yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I think this is a really creative and interesting short. I love the music that the song that they sing about it, that is over the entire short. And it is a musical short, so like the characters are singing too. Although one of my only problems with it is that the girl doll, the singer for her is clearly a man, and it's just a guy doing falsetto, and it sounds awful. Uh, but luckily the girl doesn't have that many lines, so it's fine for the most part. It's just a few scenes when she is singing. But for the rest of it, like I love the story. I love how it does how, like, you see like the dolls coming to life and stuff, and it's just like, I think it's just a really, and also the story itself is really interesting because it's kind of like really detailed. It's like, so you have the villain toy kidnap the girl, and he takes her to his car, and then to try and get out of it, she tries to like come on to him a little bit, or like try and give into his advances so she can find a way to like get out of there. And eventually she pulls out some yarn and knitting needles. It's like, you're gonna help me do my knitting? And then he ties up his hands, and she escapes or knocks him out or something. And then I remember the part where the girl is like driving the car, and then the villain has kidnapped the boy, but then like the boy doll, and I think he's flying a plane, and crashes into the cuckoo clock. But the girl is like driving out all out of control, and crashes, and then she goes to the hospital and needs a sawdust transfusion, and the boy doll volunteers. It's just like, I can help. And then it's like the short started with the girl commenting on like why he's all messed up, and apparently it's because he needed to give the girl doll a transfusion of sawdust. And I just think that's really funny. Yeah, it's a really weird story, but I really liked it.
Yes. No, I was very fond of it, and I guess I shouldn't say too much because we need to keep some suspense in the air as we head towards the ranking.
Yeah, I'm kind of bad about like keeping the suspense of the ranks. It's like, I like in other episodes I've been like mentioning other shorts and how they compare when before that. It's just like, oh wait, and I remind myself like, oh wait, I gotta keep the suspense. Like, what's going to be our number one? What's going to be our number 6? Like, Greetings Bait could be number 1. Who knows? Do you have anything else to say?
No, not about this.
Imagination. Yeah. Okay. So let's move on then to our 6th and final nominee, Reason and Emotion, directed by Bill Roberts. This is the 19th nomination for Walt Disney in this category. The short personifies 2 parts of human personality. Emotion is presented as this Danny DeVito-esque caveman who acts on instinct and primal urges. And then Reason is depicted as a bookish nerd, always focused on what's right and always wanting to think before doing anything. And you might not think this is war propaganda, but it is, surprisingly. Now, I'm not really sure what to think about this short. I'm not sure if I really like it or not, because it's very kind of straightforward, and it's like it does exactly what you think it might do until the weird turn into propaganda. It just kind of like shows, it does a very inside out kind of thing, like where it's just like, it shows how, like, it shows a human action, and then it shows like what's happening in the person's brain as that happens. So like, as a baby, like, you don't have any reason, you just have emotion, and it's like there's a little guy in the baby's brain, like, go pull the tail, go jump down the stairs. But then Reason moves in, and then they grow up, and it's just like, you got to respect women, and the emotion, it's like, no, I don't want to. It's just like, and we also see a glimpse into the brain of a woman. It's just like, the emotion of woman wants to eat all the time, but the Reason wants to keep the figure. And it's just like, wow, this sure is the 1940s.
Yes.
Uh,
And it's not even as sophisticated in its commentary as Inside Out, which was a fairly simple story in terms of the ideas that it was exploring. But at least in that film, you get this slightly complex idea that sometimes you need to be sad and you need to be depressed in order to appreciate the good times, in order to learn lessons. And say you're grieving someone, it wouldn't be right if you felt joyful and happy while going through that experience. Whereas this idea that reason and emotion can't go together, can't combine, is sort of odd. I don't think that they're necessarily opposites. And then the introduction of Hitler as a figure who's entirely driven by emotion was
he
sort of,
plays on your emotions and all that.
that was sort of odd. It does seem to dumb down possibly the most evil human being in history, where they're taking Nazi ideology and sort of just implying that he's one of many demagogues who exist. And I guess this is a common frustration with films about World War II from this era, where I always find myself thinking, okay, but why are we not discussing the anti-Semitism more? Because that's the worst part. And I sort of hate the fact that the implication, instead of it being his ideology is hateful, it's this bizarre, oh, he was born this way or something, or some human beings are naturally endowed with the ability to be evil. And I think the horror of Hitler and the one of the many, many awful things about his reign in Germany was that he did get all of these seemingly ordinary people who possessed a moral compass to serve as part of his army and to do these unspeakable, awful things. And I think that this cartoon shot, where it would be ridiculous to suggest that this needs to be the shower of cartoon shots, where it says something profound and meaningful about this historical tragedy. But I still wish that there was slightly more nuance there, and it does feel as though they're afraid of getting too specific. They're afraid of getting into the nitty gritty when it comes to the atrocities that Hitler is responsible for.
Yeah, it's very kind of simplistic short, and it's like that is really kind of spelled out with how it really introduces the whole Hitler subplot, I guess, the whole when it transitions into that part of it, because it's like and like sure, being emotional all the time is fine for Hitler. It's just like this very jarring transition, and just like, and yeah, it's not very. One thing I really thought was weird about it was how it does portray, like, it makes it seem like Germans were like they were all Nazis like out of fear of Hitler. Like nobody actually wanted to be a Nazi. Like it was just because they were all afraid of him. And when really he kind of like preyed on like worries and stuff in order to get them on his side to agree with him and stuff. It's like,
And yeah,
no, go
and
ahead.
took advantage of the fact that these prejudices were already so prevalent in their
Exactly.
society, and anti-Semitism was already there, and he just ratcheted it up a lot.
Exactly. Like 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 yeah, exactly as you said. It's no other really way to put it. Uh but yeah, it's just a very this is a very odd short. Or and it's just like, and I think I do kind of like the early parts of it. I think it's kind of cute how it kind of does two parts of human personality and stuff. And it's just like, even though it is like very, very simplistic, like even though, and like you said, it's like Inside Out does this whole thing a lot better, but I don't know. It's just a very strange short among this lineup. And at least it's interesting. At least it's something we have stuff to say about, unlike the other ones, some of the others in this lineup.
The brain of a woman bit is unintentionally hilarious.
Yeah, I did really enjoy, like I really related to the emotion part of the woman in Braid, like how she wants to eat all the time. It's like, yeah, that's me. I enjoyed that.
Yes. But just the way they sound so bewildered when when they have to comprehend what goes on in the mind of a female. It's just so funny.
It's really funny, and not in the ways that they intended it to be. They just wanted you to laugh at the idea of a woman having thoughts.
Yes.
But yeah, I think that's a good place to end. Like not on the dreariness of the Holocaust, but instead on the funniness of misogyny. Anyway, that was our final nominee. And now that we've gone through, it talks about the 6 nominees. Let's rank them all. Zita, start us off with your number 6.
So I think I'm going to put Greetings Bait in the final spot.
It's same here. Greetings Bait is just a very, very lacking short in terms of its humor. And when you don't have humor, there isn't much left there.
No.
Number 5.
The 500 Hats of Bartholomew Cubbins.
My number 5 is the Dizzy Acrobat, which I felt was also a bit lacking in humor. But my number 4 is 500 Hats, because it's kind of boring and lacking in a lot of things. But also, I thought it was more interesting than the other 2.
My number 4 is Reason and Emotion.
All right. My number 3 is Reason and Emotion. And I, like we just said about how I don't really know what to think of it, but I do know that I enjoyed it more than half of these shorts. So it comes in at number 3.
And then I have the Dizzy Acrobat at number 3.
That's interesting. My number 2 is the Yankee Doodle Mouse. I think this is just a really great example of why Tom and Jerry has lasted so long. I think it's a great example of the slapsticky humor. It's just a very, very, very good cartoon short from this time.
Yes, and I have it in the same position where I don't think it's quite as interesting, for lack of a more exciting word, as the film that I have in the number 1 spot.
All right, and number 1 for apparently both of us is Imagination. Yeah, I've been a long time fan of this short ever since I first saw it, and I just really love this whole thing. It is filled with imagination to me.
Yes, absolutely. It feels so different from what little I've seen to many of the other shorts getting nominated around this time.
All right. But before we end our show, Zita, are there any final thoughts you'd like to share or anything you'd like to promote?
Oh, well, I host a podcast called the 300 Passions podcast, and Jackie has been a guest on many occasions. I've been lucky enough to have you on, so that's been utterly thrilling. And on the podcast, we discuss American romantic dramas from various different eras. Often we end up talking about fairly obscure films, but it's still fun to pick apart something like Legends of the Fall, even if it's a dreadful Brad Pitt vehicle.
Yeah, that's just the fall is awful. God. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Zita, for coming on the show, and thank you, listener, for tuning in. This has been the short podcast about short films. Until next time, goodbye.